On a freezing Kansas night, veteran trucker Carl Brighton spots a little girl shivering alone at a rest stop, no jacket, clutching a worn bunny plush. She won't speak, only whispering, "My mom said wait here." For days later, her face appears on the evening news. What happened in between will change more lives than Carl could ever imagine. Snow fell in slow, steady curtains against the windshield as Carl Brighton eased his rig into the nearly empty rest stop parking lot. The wipers beat a tired rhythm, squeaking on the glass. It was just past midnight, and the Kansas highway stretched behind him like an endless white ribbon. His eyelids felt heavy, the familiar fatigue of 15 hours on the road weighing down his muscles. All he wanted was a quick cup of coffee before catching a few hours of sleep in the cab. He killed the engine, the deep rumble fading into the muffled hush of the storm. The fluorescent lights above the rest stop hummed faintly, casting pale halos in the drifting snow. Carl zipped up his thick canvas jacket and stepped into the biting wind. As he crossed the parking lot, the soles of his boots scraped and slid over a thin crust of melting slush, each step releasing a muted crunch. The sharp night air carried the greasy tang of overused fryer oil and coffee left too long on the burner, drifting from the small diner wedged tightly between the restrooms and vending area. Inside, the place was warm, almost too warm after the sharp cold outside. A couple of long-haul drivers sat at the counter, heads bent over steaming mugs, talking in low voices. The cashier, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, gave Carl a polite nod from behind the register. He nodded back and started toward the coffee pots. That's when he saw her. A little girl, no more than 8 years old, sat curled up on the vinyl bench near the vending machines. She wore a thin, faded t-shirt and jeans. No jacket. Her small hands clutched a threadbare bunny plush, its ears limp and stained from years of love. She wasn't crying, but her lips had the bluish tinge of someone who'd been cold for far too long. Her wide eyes followed him without blinking, wary and silent. Carl slowed his steps, unsure whether to speak. "Hey there," he said gently, keeping his voice low, like he might spook her if he was too loud. "You okay, kiddo? Where's your mom or dad?" She said nothing, just held the bunny closer. Carl glanced at the cashier. "That little girl been here long?" The woman frowned, shaking her head. "I just came on 15 minutes ago. Didn't see her come in. Figured she was with someone." She looked toward the entrance, as if expecting to see a parent walk in. "You saying she's alone?" "Looks like it." Carl's stomach tightened. A rest stop at midnight, in a storm, was no place for a child to be alone. He walked back toward the girl, crouching so his eyes were level with hers. "You hungry? Want some hot chocolate?" "Nothing." She just stared at him, eyes wide and unblinking, and shifted slightly away. Carl straightened. He'd dealt with enough situations on the road to know pressing too hard wouldn't get him answers. Maybe whoever she was with was in the restroom. Maybe they'd just stepped outside for a call. He decided to pour his coffee and keep watch until someone came. It took less than a minute to fill the cup and add cream. When he turned back toward the bench, she was gone. Carl set the cup down so fast coffee sloshed over the rim. His eyes swept the diner. The counter, empty booth by the door, the vending machine corner, nothing. He pushed open the door to the hallway that led to the restrooms, checking quickly. No sign of her. A knot of unease twisted tighter in his chest. He stepped outside into the wind, the snow instantly stinging his face. The lot was quiet, the only movement the drifting flakes illuminated by the overhead lights. He walked a slow circle around the building, boots crunching through crusted snow. That's when he heard it. A faint rustle, almost drowned by the wind. He followed the sound toward the dumpsters at the far edge of the lot. The shadows were deep there, the light poles struggling to reach past the swirling snow. She was crouched behind one of the dumpsters, knees pulled up under her chin, bunny clutched tight. "Hey," Carl said softly, approaching slowly so he wouldn't startle her. "You're freezing out here." For a long moment, she just stared, her breath fogging in quick puffs. Then, in the faintest whisper, she spoke for the first time. "My mom said wait here." The words hit him harder than the cold. His mind filled in the blanks instantly. Broken down car, stranded on the highway, a parent trying to get help. He knew that desperation. He'd lived it once before, when his own daughter had been sick and help felt impossibly far away. He shrugged out of his jacket and draped it over her small shoulders. It nearly swallowed her whole. "Let's get you inside where it's warm," he said. She didn't protest when he gently took her hand. The small, ice-cold fingers curled into his glove, gripping like they'd been waiting for someone to hold on to. As they walked back toward the diner through the snow, Carl's thoughts were already racing ahead, to who she was, where her mother was, and how in God's name she'd ended up waiting out there in the cold for what felt like far too long. Inside, the blast of heat made her flinch, but she didn't let go of his hand. Carl guided her to a booth, told the cashier to bring something hot to drink, and reached for his phone. He didn't know what the night would bring, but one thing was certain: he wasn't letting this little girl out of his sight again. Carl kept his phone to his ear, eyes fixed on the little girl sitting in the booth across from him. She was sipping hot chocolate now, both hands wrapped around the mug like it was the only thing keeping her alive. Steam curled around her face, but her expression stayed guarded. Eyes flicking to the door every few seconds, as if she expected someone to walk through at any moment. The dispatcher's voice came through the line. "We've got a unit nearby. Officers should be there in about 10 minutes. You said she told you her mother told her to wait." "That's right," Carl replied, lowering his voice so the girl wouldn't hear too much. "No coat. Out there in this storm. She's scared out of her mind." "Understood. Stay with her until help arrives. Do not let her leave your sight." Carl hung up and slid into the booth across from her. "What's your name, kiddo?" She stared into the mug. Silence. "That your bunny?" he asked, nodding at the stuffed animal still tucked under her arm. Her chin dipped in the faintest nod. She shifted the bunny in her arms, smoothing one of its bent ears with slow, careful strokes, as if making sure it was comfortable. Then, in a small, almost inaudible voice, she murmured, "He's the only one who stayed with me." It wasn't clear if she meant the stuffed animal or the truth she was too afraid to say out loud, but it made Carl's chest tighten. "You know," Carl began, leaning back in the booth, "I used to have a stuffed bear when I was little. Went everywhere with me. My dad used to joke it was so worn out it could barely sit up straight." A ghost of a smile flickered at the corners of her mouth. Small, quick, but enough to tell him she was listening. When the police arrived, the girl tensed, sliding closer to the wall. Carl moved slowly, keeping his voice calm. "It's okay. They're here to help." 2 officers stepped in, shaking snow from their shoulders. The older one, a broad man with a wind-chapped face, crouched beside the booth. "Hey there, sweetheart. My name's Officer Grant. Can we talk for a minute?" The girl didn't answer. Carl gave the officer a look that said she's not ready, and Grant nodded. Grant pulled Carl aside. "We just got a call from County General in Colton, about 20 miles east. A woman matching the girl's description was brought in by a Good Samaritan. Collapsed on the shoulder of Highway 67. Severe exhaustion, mild hypothermia. Car trouble." Carl's jaw tightened. "She was out there walking for help?" "From what we're told, yeah. Left her daughter in the rest area because she thought someone would find her quicker than walking with her in the storm." Grant lowered his voice. "Hospital says they can't release her yet. She's stable, but they're keeping her overnight for observation. There's another problem. No guardian to stay with the girl and no deposit to cover a transfer for her mother." Carl frowned. "Deposit?" Grant nodded grimly. "It's not supposed to work that way, but you know how it is, short-staffed, tight budgets, insurance headaches. Without payment or a family member to sign off, the mom stays put. Could be days." Something sharp and familiar twisted in Carl's gut. He'd been there. Years ago, when his own daughter was 7, she'd been rushed to the ER with pneumonia. He'd been 2 states away on a run, racing home while his wife tried to convince hospital staff to admit her without full insurance information. By the time he arrived, he'd been ready to tear down the admissions desk just to get them to listen. He turned his gaze back to the girl. She was running a finger along the rim of the mug now, eyes distant, as if she wasn't really in the diner at all. "What happens to her tonight?" Carl asked. "She can stay with us at the station until Child Services finds placement," Grant said. "We'll try to get her to her mom as soon as possible." But with the storm, he let the sentence fade. Carl looked away, jaw clenched. The girl had already spent who knew how many hours in the cold, clutching that bunny like a lifeline. He imagined her waking up in a strange bed in some foster home, not knowing if she'd see her mom tomorrow or next week. He knew that kind of waiting. He hated it. As the officers spoke quietly to the cashier, Carl pulled his wallet from his jacket on the seat. Inside, folded beneath his license, was a plain white envelope. He carried it for emergencies, a habit from years of unpredictable roads and unpredictable life. $5,000 in crisp bills. He'd been saving it for repairs, for the kind of breakdown that could kill a delivery schedule. He stared at it for a long moment. Then, without a word, he stood and crossed the diner. The girl's eyes tracked him. He set the envelope on the table beside her mug, then reached for his jacket draped over the back of the booth. He wrapped it gently around her again, tucking the bunny inside. From his pocket, he pulled a small folded note he'd scrawled in his neat, careful handwriting. He placed the note on top of the envelope. "No child should ever wait this long in the cold. Let this buy her warmth and bring her mom home." He didn't wait for thanks. Didn't tell the officers. By the time they realized he'd gone, he was already pushing out into the storm, the diner door swinging shut behind him. The snow swallowed him in seconds, the rumble of his engine fading into the night as he merged back onto the highway. The road stretched ahead, white and endless. He kept his eyes forward, but his mind lingered on the image of the girl in his jacket, bunny clutched tight, safe for the first time in hours. He told himself it was enough. But deep down, he knew the story wasn't over. Not for him and not for her. By the time Carl crossed into the Colorado foothills, the Kansas night had begun to feel like a half-remembered dream, one of those vivid moments that clung to the mind but blurred at the edges. He hadn't told anyone about what he'd done at the rest stop. He hadn't called to check on the girl or her mother. That wasn't his way. You helped, you moved on. The road didn't leave room for lingering. But the world was smaller than it used to be. 2 days later, in a small truck stop outside Aspen Ridge, Carl sat in a corner booth with a plate of overcooked eggs and a mug of coffee that tasted faintly of metal. The TV above the counter was turned low, the morning news playing over shots of icy highways and snowbound towns. He wasn't paying much attention until a headline in bold letters caught his eye. "Search continues for Rest Stop Angel. After anonymous gift saves stranded family." Carl froze, fork hovering in midair. On screen, a reporter stood in front of the Kansas rest stop, snow swirling around her. She held up a photo of a folded note. His note, along with a crisp image of the stuffed bunny he'd seen clutched in the little girl's arms. The girl's mother appeared next, speaking softly into the camera. Her face was pale but warm with gratitude. She talked about collapsing on the highway, about waking in the hospital to find her daughter safe, warm, and holding an envelope with enough money to cover every bill and get their life back on track. "We just want to thank him," the woman said, her voice breaking. "Whoever he is, please, if you're watching this, you saved us. You gave us more than money. You gave me my child back." Carl set his fork down, the clink of metal against plate loud in the quiet booth. A couple of drivers at the counter shook their heads in disbelief, muttering about the generosity it must have taken. Someone joked about how the rest stop angel was probably halfway to Mexico by now, chuckling as they sipped their coffee. Carl kept his gaze on his plate, but inside, something churned. Like a restless pull, the feeling that he was carrying a secret the rest of the world was chasing. By the time he finished his breakfast, his mind was already on the next load. A refrigerated shipment bound for a mountain town depot. The route would take him deeper into the Rockies, past towns where the snow piled high against the rooftops and every turn in the road revealed a cliff edge. It was in one of those towns, 2 days later, that the past caught up to him. The snow was falling again as Carl eased his rig into the lot of the Pinecrest Truck Plaza. It was the kind of place that looked frozen in time, Faded signage, cracked asphalt, a diner with half the neon letters burnt out. He pulled up to the fuel island, stepping down from the cab as the wind cut across the lot. "Need a top off?" A voice called from behind. Carl turned to see an older driver walking toward him, a tall man with a broad chest and a limp in his step. He wore a thick navy parka, the fur-lined hood pushed back to reveal silver hair neatly combed despite the wind. His eyes, a sharp steel blue, studied Carl with an intensity that felt familiar. "Yeah," Carl said, reaching for the pump. The man stopped a few feet away, looking Carl over with a long, measuring stare. "You know," he said slowly, "I've been hearing a lot about this rest stop angel on the news. Little girl in Kansas, saved by a stranger who gave her his jacket and a whole lot more. They never said his name." Carl's brow furrowed. And, the man continued, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "When I saw you just now, something clicked. Took me a second to place you, but that scar under your chin gave you away. You got it when you slipped on the ice in Sheridan. Busted it open pretty good. I remember handing you a cup of coffee while you pressed a rag to it, swearing you didn't need a medic." Carl studied him for a long moment. "We've met. Peter Laramie," the man said, extending a gloved hand. "You were just a kid running freight in a blizzard, driving a rig that had no business being on the road. Broke down outside Sheridan, Wyoming. Remember?" Carl's breath caught. The memory slammed back. Snow waist deep, his truck dead on the side of a county road, heater fading. He'd been ready to walk into the white when a man in a Peterbilt pulled over, got him warm, fed him, and handed him cash to get the truck fixed. He'd never even caught the man's name. "That was you," Carl said. Peter nodded. "Guess you paid it forward." They stood in the snow for a while, the fuel pump clicking steadily between them. Peter didn't press for details, didn't ask why Carl hadn't come forward. Instead, he clapped a hand on Carl's shoulder. "Doesn't matter if the world knows your name. What matters is the road remembers. And those who get pulled out of the ditch don't forget the hand that did it." Carl felt a weight lift. Someone understood. They shared a quiet meal inside the diner afterward, trading stories of long nights, close calls, and the strange fraternity that existed between those who made their living on the asphalt. When they parted, there were no promises to keep in touch, no dramatic farewells. Just a nod, and the knowledge that some debts were repaid in miles rather than words. Carl climbed back into his cab as the snow thickened, the road ahead vanishing into white. Somewhere behind him, the news crews were still chasing the rest stop angel. But Carl wasn't looking back. Some stories weren't meant for headlines, they were meant for the people who lived them. The snow had stopped by the time Carl's next delivery took him south, winding down from the high passes into flatter country. Days blurred together in the usual rhythm. Miles under the tires, radio low in the background, truck stop coffee in chipped mugs. The Kansas night lingered in his mind less as a story and more as a feeling, the kind that stayed tucked in a quiet corner of the heart. Hundreds of miles away, people were still talking about him. It was more than just a headline. Local news stations carried updates, strangers argued online about who he might be, and trucker forums lit up with speculation. But it was the girl's mother, Sarah McKinney, who refused to let the story fade. Carl only learned about what she'd done when he happened to catch a brief radio segment while idling at a red light. Her voice came through the speaker, clear, steady, and determined. She spoke about the night she'd broken down, about leaving her daughter at the rest stop because she thought it was safer than the shoulder of a deserted highway, and about waking in the hospital to find the note, the money, and the jacket wrapped around her child. "I don't know his name," she said, "but I know what he gave us, and I know I want to make sure no other family is left out in the cold like that. We're starting a campaign to install emergency shelter kits at every rest stop in the state. Blankets, food, first aid supplies, hand warmers. It's the least we can do to honor what he did for us." Carl turned the volume down and stared at the red light until it turned green. He could picture her, stronger now, standing in front of microphones, telling a room full of reporters about something he'd meant to keep private. 2 weeks later, during a run through eastern Kansas, Carl passed the exit for the very rest stop where it had all started. He told himself to keep going. There was no need to stop. His delivery schedule was tight, and besides, the past was better left where it was. But a mile past the turnoff, he found himself flicking on the signal, easing the truck onto the off-ramp. The snow was gone now, replaced by patches of winter grass and a cold, clear sky. The lot was busier than he remembered. More cars, a few families stretching their legs. And near the diner entrance, a small crowd had gathered around something new. Carl parked at the far end of the lot, out of sight, and walked the rest of the way. That's when he saw it. A gleaming metal cabinet bolted to the wall, stocked with neatly organized emergency supplies. Above it, a plaque read, "In honor of the Rest Stop Angel for the kindness that warms even the coldest nights, dedicated to Carl Brighton," his name, in bold letters. He stopped short, the air catching in his throat. He hadn't given his name to anyone, which meant Sarah must have found it. Maybe through the police report, maybe from someone at the diner who remembered him. Later, Carl would learn the truth in passing. Sarah had tracked him down the way only a determined mother could, calling the rest stop manager, finding the night cashier, and matching his description to a receipt left behind with the name C. Brighton, scrawled in a delivery log. It wasn't easy, but she said it felt important that the plaque carried the name of the man who'd turned a freezing night into a second chance. A little boy in a red winter coat tugged at his mother's sleeve, pointing at the cabinet. "Is that for if you get stuck?" he asked. "That's right," she said, smiling. "Because sometimes, there's someone out there who cares enough to help." Carl stood there for a long moment, then stepped back before anyone could turn and recognize him. He wasn't there for a speech or for photos. He'd never wanted to be the center of the story. Back in the cab, he pulled onto the highway again. The sun was low on the horizon, turning the asphalt gold. His logbook was full, his fuel gauge steady, and the next delivery was already waiting. As the miles rolled by, his thoughts drifted to Peter, to Sarah and her daughter, to the dozens of faces he'd met at diners and fuel stops, people who'd offered him directions, tools, a meal, or a kind word without asking for anything in return. The road didn't keep score, but it remembered, and so would he. Far ahead, the sky shifted from gold to deep blue, the first stars pricking through. Carl reached for the CB mic, an old habit, and keyed it on. "Safe travels out there," he said into the static, his voice low but steady. "Watch the weather near mile marker 240. Could get slick tonight." He hung the mic back on its hook and let the hum of the engine settle into the quiet. Somewhere, another driver might be listening. Somewhere, another story was beginning. For Carl Brighton, that was enough. He didn't need the world to know his name. He just needed to keep driving, because out here on these endless stretches of highway, there was always another mile, another night, another chance to be the hand someone reached for in the dark. This story reminds us that kindness can travel farther than we ever see. Carl never stayed to be thanked. He just kept moving, like the road itself. What about you? Would you stop and help, even if no one knew? Share your thoughts below, and if this story moved you, please give it a like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more stories that stay with you long after the engine cools.